RotoGrinders, and welcome to the Week 16 edition of the Pro Football Focus. That's the PFF Focus show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Dean 78904. If you want to get all technical on me, that's correct. Do not adjust your internet televisions. Life came up, so I'm filling in for him here at the last second. Called to the bullpen. I'm joined by my two best friends, at least for the next hour, Scott Barrett, Tyler Buecher. Scott, how's Thursday night treating you? No Thursday night game. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. Really allows me to just focus on my big RotoGrinders article that's coming out tomorrow. Make sure you guys check that out. But I'm enjoying it.
Tyler, how about yourself? How's Thursday treating you?
It's an interesting mix-up. I was very close to going to the 76ers game because there was no Thursday night football, but instead we're here doing PFF podcast here with RotoGrinders. Pretty excited to dive into the slate. It's Week 16, man. We're chugging along in the season.
So you're like the fan version of Joel Embiid, because Joel Embiid earlier today was questionable. He was upgraded to probable, and he was just scratched. Now he's out. So
yep.
There you go. Embiid played a triple overtime game a couple days ago, and he's still recovering, and he's got a back issue. But people didn't come here for that as far as basketball news. Of course, we want to talk about football. I guess we have to, we can't just pretend it's not happening, Scott, but just kind of an overview, I think, on this gross two-game slate on Saturday night. It's the appetizer slate. It's a really bad – this is not like a bloomin' onion. This is like the fried zucchini or something. I don't know what a bad appetizer is, but Minnesota, Green Bay, Indianapolis versus Baltimore, Scott. There's some huge contests out there. People love them, some two-game slates. How are we attacking this?
Right. So I played a bunch of Thursday night, Saturday. Had 100% Devonta Freeman, which was nice. 100% OJ Howard, which was pretty okay at his salary. But then I loaded up on in what I thought would be a shootout against Aaron Rodgers. With him out now, that game gets a lot less attractive. Adam Thielen's my number 2 wide receiver on the week. So I'm expecting big things from him, but it's also just a difficult week in general for receivers. Fine with the Keenum, Diggs, Thielen dub stack. But really on the other game, it's just very little to like. Alex Collins, of course, he just started seeing majority of the goal line work, which was always a concern for him, but the carries and targets are there. Though as a percentage of team running back volume, it's not great, but just raw counting stats, those are good, and he's been efficient all year. Ravens defense, obviously, feel like that's the chalk. And T.Y. Hilton, on paper, it's a really tough matchup against the Ravens, but Jimmy Smith is out, and he's one of our top 15 graded cornerbacks. They've really struggled without him, especially deep, which is where T.Y. Hilton excels. I also have a model that looks at where a receiver is most frequently targeted versus where an opposing defense is most susceptible. And T.Y. Hilton was one of my top 3 or top 5 wide receivers of the week, just looking at that model. So I'm actually optimistic about him, and he's pretty cheap.
All right, Tyler, I know you want to talk about the Colts. It's really not a good slate when the first thing that pops out to me is defenses. Yeah, that I'm very excited to play Baltimore and Minnesota possibly. It's not a great slate, but hey, we're all playing with the same potential options. Talk about the Colts for me.
The Colts are a tough play. There's very few options on there. Scott made the case for T.Y. Hilton there. He's not somebody I'd like to play. I'd much rather take a shot with someone like Mike Wallace, who's seeing a significant amount of targets over the last couple of weeks, and I think it has just as big of a ceiling. I guess the only real Colts play worth mentioning is Jack Doyle. He's the most expensive. Kyle Rudolph's 5,100. Jack Doyle just has probably the safest floor, probably the safest median projection heading into the week. But man, this is a game where I think we should just do a ton of Baltimore and a ton of Vikings onslaughts.
Yeah, it's not going to be a fun slate. But hey, if I'm around Saturday, I'm probably going to fire at it, because what else? You can't just watch the games and not have any action as far as DFS. But let's dive into the main slate. Let's hit the encore up. Let's talk about, of course, do position by position. Every single position we have, each one of y'all have a stud, a value play, and a dud. Scott, fire away your stud.
So I kind of stepped on Tyler's toes here, but just know that we're both in agreement that Dak Prescott's probably the best quarterback play of the week. He's super cheap. Seattle's given up 72 points over the past 2 weeks. That's the most they've surrendered over any 2-game stretch since 2010. They have injuries to Nazir Jones, Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, Michael Bennett, of course, Richard Sherman as well. Prescott's also getting Ezekiel Elliott back in the lineup, which should help. Prescott's averaged only 12.8 fantasy points per game in his absence, while Elliott was in the lineup. However, Prescott finished as a QB1 in 9 of his previous 10 games, and I believe top 3 in 3 of his last 4. And he's just too cheap. So I'm going to have heavy exposure to him this week.
What do you think if Tyron Smith doesn't go? He didn't practice today. We record this on a Thursday if you're watching this later. But, the left tackle, obviously, he's a big asset to the offensive line. How much does that hit Dak Prescott?
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely hurt. We saw him have his worst game of the season with Tyron Smith out. Definitely would play a large role, though. Ezekiel Elliott coming back should help negate some of that, of course.
Value play?
For me,
fire it off.
That would be Drew Stanton against the Giants. The Giants rank dead last in opposing passer rating. They rank second worst in fantasy points per dropback. They've surrendered the most plays of 30 or more yards through the air. Janoris Jenkins will not play. Landon Collins, he is PFF's number 8 graded safety this year. The Giants' top graded coverage defender. Stanton's minimum price on DraftKings. He hit at least 15 DraftKings fantasy points in his 2 starts this season. I just think he's a great value play, and I like pairing him up with Larry Fitzgerald in tournaments.
We'll get to your dud in a second. Let's jump into Tyler. Talk about your stud, because I think I feel like a bounce back game is coming this week.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone there, and I'm really hoping recency bias really affects DFS players this week after his Week 15 clunker against the Rams. But the guy we're talking about is Russell Wilson. This is a game that could be a sneaky shootout, in my opinion, with both defenses struggling. Both teams are fighting for a wild card spot. They're coming in with matching 8-6 records, so they both have a lot to play for, and I think there's a high ceiling to pursue here in this game. Tons of great plays at every position here. The Cowboys have allowed the 7th most passing yards, 4th most passing touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. So they've been hit with injuries and poor play as of late. I think Russell Wilson has the tools to effectively take advantage of that. In fact, the Cowboys have allowed multiple passing touchdowns to 10 of the 14 quarterbacks they face this year. Wilson has scored 20-plus DK points in 7 of his last 9 matchups, and he's either thrown or run for 33 of the Seahawks' 34 touchdowns this year. Just an incredible stat there. He's pricey on both sides, yeah, but I think I'd rather take him on DK, where he's just 14% of your budget compared to 15% on FanDuel.
Who got that one touchdown? You know?
I think it was J.D. McKissick.
Yeah, I think it was like a little run. Yeah, that's like a sweeper. So that sounds about right. And what did you make of Carroll leaving him in last week, like deep into the fourth quarter, down like 40-7? My theory is, I think like he's trying to pad his stats, like make him for a potential MVP. I don't think he's getting MVP, but I mean that was like, what else makes sense there? Like Carroll's just like delusional. He should have been out of the game, right?
Yeah, none of that game made sense. I was blown away. I think he had 7 sacks in that game. He was just asking for trouble leaving him in there.
Well, I mean, the sacks make sense because that line is just terrible. But yeah, imagine that line without Wilson behind him. But I guess they kind of built it because they had Wilson, I suppose. I don't know. Give me your cheapie.
Cheap play, Mitch Trubisky. So it's not a pretty one, but it's kind of grown on me as we've progressed through the week. Cleveland's pass funnel defense has been one that we've been attacking all year. We've had a lot of great success doing it. The Browns have now moved into the top spot, owning the worst QB rating allowed to opposing quarterbacks at 102.7 this year. They've allowed the 6th most fantasy points and 2nd most passing touchdowns this year. Trubisky has put up 21.3 and 16.9 fantasy points in his last 2 outings. He's coming around. I think they're giving him the ball a bit more, trying to see what they have with him. Really like this game script for him. 7-point home favorites. Won't be facing any negative game script for him. Can alternate Jordan Howard handoffs with plus EV throws to Kendall Wright over the middle all day. I just really like his ceiling here. I think he has a bit of a higher ceiling than Drew Stanton, and I'd be willing to shell out that extra $200 on DK for him.
Yeah, John Fox finally realized that, hey, you know what you can do in football is you can throw a forward pass. And maybe we should let our prized quarterback do that and try that, because they, Bears games earlier in the season sometimes look like Army-Navy games or something like that, just taking it back to the 1940s or so. Scott, it's funny. You said Prescott's your stud, and like he's not really priced like a stud. Dollar for dollar, you prefer Prescott over Wilson. That's what I'm hearing over there.
Yeah, probably. But you made a great point about Tyron Smith, so I might flip those guys if Smith is out.
So your dud, I mean, the internet's going to be very angry at you because it's my understanding that Twitter is telling me that this guy's even better than Tom Brady. Who is your dud?
That would be Jimmy Garoppolo. This one's easy, sort of a cop-out. He's played really well. He ranks second in passing yards over the past 3 weeks since he took over as a starter. He's also one of PFF's top 5 graded passers over that stretch. Still, he's struggled to find the end zone. 2-to-2 touchdown interception ratio, and the matchup couldn't be worse. Jacksonville ranks best in the league in both opposing passer rating and fantasy points per dropback. In opposing passer rating, that's also one of the 10 best of the past decade. So just a really difficult matchup, and I will not be on him.
Yeah, Garoppolo's been amazing. Like, you just can't close out deal, but just red zone, something happens there. But Robbie Gould certainly benefited a lot. Is this the week we stop playing Robbie Gould? I don't want to pick on Jacksonville. I mean, is this it? It was a good run.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to give kicker analysis, but I like him less than the 100% exposure I had him last week.
I don't want to give kicker analysis either, but some sites they've sort of force you to they won't accept this is an invalid roster if you don't click on one, but that's sort of where his price was raised to. And I don't want to pick on Jacksonville. Tyler, I'm sure you have plenty of kicker takes to get to as the show progresses, but who is your dud who's basically been a dud the entire season?
Yeah, no big shocker here. It's Matt Ryan. I'm fading quarterbacks against the Saints. I think that's been a pretty plus EV move for most of the year. Bad news for Matt Ryan. He's facing the healthy secondary of the Saints. They've just been completely playing lights out this season. 2 weeks ago, this Saints defense held Ryan to just 9.8 fantasy points. He threw for 220 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. He's got a really tough matchup here on the outside against Marshawn Lattimore, who's our number 4 graded cornerback this year. He's expected to shadow Julio in this matchup. In their previous week 13 matchup, week 14 matchup, he held Julio to 3 catches, 73 yards on 5 targets. Lattimore is allowing the second lowest passer rating of all cornerbacks this season at just 37.5 when targeted. This defense as a whole is allowing the 7th lowest passer rating on the year. They're allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position. There's just a really tough case to be made for Ryan. It's much easier just to argue against him. I'd much rather pay $100 more for Phillip Rivers or $100 less for Matthew Stafford easily. And I think both guys could easily outplay Ryan here.
What do you make of the Falcons? It's funny, this Falcons-Saints game, Breeze and Ryan. Breeze, not so much his fault, but both these quarterbacks, you'd be so much more profitable if you just X these 2 guys out at the start of every single week this season. You'd be perfectly fine and way ahead of the game. Because at no point did you ever say, I wish I rostered one of those guys. I don't think they'd even have one of those nut games. Maybe Brees did once. I'm not really sure. But why are the Falcons is it because just the OC? Did they overachieve last year? Is it a multitude of reasons? But why are they just not as good this year? Well, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, they saw Matt Ryan throwing at a historic touchdown rate. I think it was 7.3% on his throws last season. Incredible. His career average, I think, is 3.4, so he doubled it. Way out of his league. He saw his best plays with Kyle Shanahan. I know some people don't take much credence in that, but I'm a huge believer in the Kyle Shanahan system. Just see what he's doing with Jimmy G. I think.
Well, you're not playing Jimmy G this week either, right?
No, and unfortunately, the run of Marquise Goodwin has come to an end too, which makes me super sad because I've been plugging him away week after week. But yeah, like you said, Steve Sarkisian just hasn't lived up to the billing.
Force him out for Marquise Goodwin. Let's talk about running backs, and we're going to go back to that Atlanta-New Orleans game. And Tyler, you're stud. I basically waved my head and said no and no and no because I'm all about volume and opportunity. Talent's not the most important thing. But this guy just keeps defying me every single week, and I'm probably not going to roster him again, and it's probably going to annoy me because he's going to go nuts once again. You tell me why I should roster a stud running back. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's week 16, and I'm pretty sure Scott's mentioned Kareem Hunt in probably 14 of the 16 weeks here. But I beat him to the page this time to call dibs. He's just been absolutely thriving ever since Andy Reid gave up play calling responsibility. Over the last 2 weeks, Hunt has seen over 66.7% of the running back snaps and 88% of the running back touches. That's some absurd volume right there. He's seen a whopping 59 touches during that 2-game span. Should continue to see heavy usage here. The Chiefs are massive, 10.5-point home favorites against the visiting Dolphins in Arrowhead. Miami just gave up a 25.6-point outing to LaShawn McCoy last week. We also saw the New England backs combined for 38.1 fantasy points the week prior. If we see Hunt get 88% of the running back touches, that 38.1 or 25.6 ceiling is something well within his range of outcomes, given what we've seen the last 2 weeks. I think it's just a safe lock here for both cash and tournaments. Not much to worry about. When Andy Reid was calling the shots, we always had to worry about Lucy pulling the football out right before the Charlie Brown kick. We saw time and time again where he'd get like 10 or 11 carries and then just throw in Charkandrick West. Thankfully, Matt Nagy knows how to utilize his best player and to just feed him the rock.
It's funny you mentioned Andy Reid and kick. Did you ever see the famous clip of him like in the punt, pass, and kick competition? He's like, he's allegedly like 11 years old, but he's like 6'7". It's like, wait a second, this guy, something's going on, and there's shenanigans going down. It's one of my favorite clips ever on the YouTube. It's worth checking out. Maybe I'll tweet it out later. But so my setup, I was actually trying to set up Scott, and I guess it worked for Hunt as well, because Alvin Kamara, Scott, I just keep saying no. He's not. I mean, look, you're asking full price. You're asking maximum price for not maximum volume. So I don't want it. But he's amazing, and every single week he has a splash play, and I'm wrong every single week, and I'll probably be wrong again.
Right. So you said volume is most important to you.
Yes.
Just to sell you a little bit more on Hunt, who I like as well. Since Andy Reid has relieved himself of play calling duties, Hunt is averaging 19.8 expected fantasy points per game. That's fourth most among running backs. But prior to that, he averages 13.7. So volume's been there for Hunt in recent weeks. He's a guy I went back and forth on between him and Alvin Kamara, who I did write up, but Tyler made it easy on me. So I'm with you. I'm a volume guy over opportunity, but Kamara is the most efficient running back on a per touch basis, on a per snap basis in the history of fantasy football, leading all running backs in fantasy points per touch, fantasy points per snap. This has also historically always been a very efficient role, the Sean Payton stat back role. If you look back over the past decade in terms of top 20 running backs over the past 10 years in fantasy points per touch, fantasy points per snap, you see a lot of Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas in that top 20. Kamara is a guy I've gotten wrong many weeks, choosing instead to go with Mark Ingram. That worked out well last week, but this week I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm going to play Alvin Kamara in a dream matchup. He leads all running backs in receiving fantasy points and would rank 23rd among all wide receivers. Atlanta is allowing the third most receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. They allowed the most last season. The smartest coach in the history of football, Bill Belichick, how did he beat them in the Super Bowl? With James White as a receiver. Kamara also ranks fifth among running backs in routes run from the slot, while Atlanta is allowing the third most fantasy points per game to slot receivers for the second straight season. The best and most efficient running back in the league now gets the perfect matchup. Let's do it.
On the turf as well. You mentioned all those stats, and like he's been amazing. There's other, and like in the eye test as well. I know like the eye test not a PFF thing necessarily, but like he certainly passes that too. And how sustainable is it basically? Like, if he sticks around, the next 3, 4, 5 years, assuming he dodges injury and all that, is he going to be this guy? Like, obviously all that matters is just for 1 week. And like you said, the matchup is great, and he's probably going to get, 17 touches or so. He's not going to get like the 28 that maybe a guy like Gurley gets, but you still think he's worth paying for, basically.
It's not sustainable. He's putting up numbers never before seen in the history of football. Missed tackles forced per touch. The statistics I referenced earlier, definitely all those are due for regression, but that doesn't mean he's still not a top 3 play this week.
Let's get a couple takes on the other big boys, though, while we're here. What about Gurley? How do you feel about Todd Gurley this week versus Tennessee?
Yeah, I'm definitely on it. I mean, the dude not only leads all running backs in fantasy points per game, but he's on pace for the 19th most all time. He totaled 45 fantasy points last week, just about near that the week before against 2 defenses ranking in the top 5 in fantasy points allowed per game to opposing running backs. This week, the matchup's a little softer. They're giving up the 5th most receiving fantasy points per game. We know Gurley is an excellent receiver this season. There's really a lot of expensive running backs to like, but Gurley, Kamara, Hunt are probably the 3 at the top of my list.
Yeah, Tyler, what are your thoughts as far as Gurley? And then also, I want to get that he's not in the list, but I'm curious what y'all think of Zeke coming back this week.
Yeah, I mean, there's not enough good things to say about Gurley. The do-it-all back just has such a great potential any given week. The Titans have been pretty good against the run, but they've allowed the sixth most receptions to opposing backs. Gurley can definitely beat him that way. Yeah.
As far as Elliott?
As far as Zeke, I mean,
I'm not worried. Are you worried?
Yeah.
Like he's been. It's not like he's injured. And allegedly he's been working out. Supposedly he's ripped once again. Like there was some of those like side show pictures of at Ohio State with the abs and at Dallas with the whatever. Like who am I to say? But look, I think he's going to absolutely smash. And like he seems underpriced because of like some concerns. And I don't imagine like they're going to unleash him. Dallas still has a 10% chance according to the stats basically to make the playoffs. They're going to do all they can. And I'm perfectly fine at AK. I'm not hesitant at all.
Yeah, I agree. He was a running machine for the Cowboys prior to suspension. In his previous 6 games, he averaged 26.3 carries per game, 28 touches during that span, 25.9 DraftKings points. Guy's a stud. The thing about Zeke is I'm kind of expecting him to have like top 3 running back ownership percentage this week. It's going to be his debut. A lot of Cowboys fans out there, even with this matchup against the Seahawks. I mean, Seattle did just get worked over by Gurley, 4 total touchdowns. But we're getting a fresh Zeke where, like you said, like he's coming into the league fresh at a time when most teams are limping to the finish line. Like he has a chance to go completely off this week.
Scott, give me your thoughts on Zeke as well, and then kind of bleed into your value play.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle is dealing with a lot of injuries. They've given up all those touchdowns and also 400 rushing yards over the past 2 weeks. Fresh legs is something that really means a lot to me this late in the season. I think it's a legitimate factor. That said, I don't know that I like him more than Melvin Gordon if Austin Eckler is out. Leonard Fournette is also intriguing against the single best matchup for any running back 3 years running. All that being said, my value in a week where it's really difficult to find value at the running back position and a lot of high-priced names to like, I got to go with Dion Lewis. So like Kamara, he's more of an efficiency guy this season than volume. He's our 4th highest rated running back this year. He ranks 3rd best in PFF elusive rating, which factors in yards after contact, missed tackles on a per touch basis. He's also been our most difficult runner to bring down on first contact. While efficiency's been good all season, it should definitely be good again this week. Buffalo's allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, the most rushing fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. And volume should improve with Rex Burkhead out, but it's not a guarantee that Mike Gillislee doesn't come in and vulture goal line work. So really, I'm going to monitor on Sunday. If Gillislee's still inactive, that's going to mark a massive swing in ownership to Dion Lewis for me. I'd have him as like a fringe RB1. But if Gillislee's active, and I think he is, Dion Lewis is more of like a mid to high range RB2, but still a value.
Is Gillislee going to play the role of Tommy Bohannon this week? Is that what's going to go down?
Yeah, I think so. Or maybe Tommy Bohannon's been playing the Mike Gillislee role. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, and he's playing against his former team. I feel like I'm contractually obligated to mention that too, I suppose.
Right.
I mean, last time he didn't even dress when he played against his former – well, he didn't play. I guess he was in the building, I suppose. Oh, man. The Patriots, the running backs, I just hate trying to figure them out. James White, as of, Thursday, again, he's currently questionable. I don't know. I would assume he's going to give it a go. We shall see. Stay tuned on that. And that'll all kind of like speak to, clarity as far as actives and inactives. But, yeah, I do agree. I'd feel much better if Gillislee was out. I would not be surprised. Gillislee, that's the one thing he supposedly could do. But those 3 1-yard touchdowns basically week 1. And he was crowned. I think they fit him for his Hall of Fame jersey then, but they've since rescinded it. Yeah, if you have a take there, Tyler, by all means, jump in on that and talk about your value play. And I guess your value play in the list situation seems to have kind of changed.
Yeah, so the only thing I have about Mike Gillislee is I was doing a ton of victory laps after week 1 and haven't been doing so many since. But my value play this week is Devonta Freeman. I think he was just the complete nuts play on the primetime and the Monday through Saturday slate that started last week. I played a ton of volume there just because I wanted to play a lot of Freeman and I wanted to play a ton of Crabtree. Both guys went off. I was very happy with that. He went off for 33.4 points last week, and his Monday night performance was not factored into pricing this week. Makes him a tremendous value if Tevin Coleman were to miss this week's game. Had a concussion, missed last week. He was limited participant on Wednesday for practice. I haven't checked Thursday's report yet.
He's cleared concussion. He cleared concussion protocol.
Okay, so yeah, that kind of nixes him here. It's just a really, really good week to pay up at running back. I don't even know if I'd be comfortable paying for one of the New England guys as a dart throw. It kind of just nixes Freeman here. There are very few safe, cheap plays this week. It's just really tough to try to find value that you can be confident in.
Yeah, there's definitely an opportunity cost when it comes to running back this week. And Scott, with Lewis, we think he's going to catch like 4 or 5 or 6 balls, which we like that in a site like DK where you get the full point PPR, obviously. Just to backtrack for 1 second, you mentioned Melvin Gordon. He's an interesting play as well against the Jets, and you're talking about the potential of Eckler being out. I heard people saying he's out for the season, and then all of a sudden they're saying he's practicing limited, so he might stick around. Wouldn't Oliver basically just sort of step into his role or not so much?
So just with regard to Lewis, I'm not even sure that he's going to get an uptick in targets. I could see James White assuming Burkhead, all of Burkhead's typical receiving workload. With Gordon, maybe, but Eckler's been the guy who's been flashing and he's been hyper efficient. So I could see, Gordon just really coming in, playing a full bell cow workload. But his workload's been fantastic in recent weeks anyway. He ranks 4th among running backs in expected fantasy points per game over the past 4 weeks. And Eckler's been averaging 5.6 expected fantasy points per game. So sure, a different backup will come in and get a percentage of that, but it's just a matter of how much. And given how well Eckler's performed, Gordon's definitely due for some more work, and it's a great matchup with good game script against Bryce Petty and the Jets.
We're going to talk about our duds in just a second, but all these high-priced running backs we like. Is there any cheapies that are worth looking at? Anything to kind of keep our eyes on? I don't want to say it. CJ Anderson, he's not even cheap actually. He's getting a ton of volume, but I'm just kind of looking for some names, trying a way to be different. Kenyon Drake is 7.1K now on DK. Williams is practicing, but I can't imagine he eats in too much just because Drake's been so good. But where was the spot I was looking at? If Kenyon Williams doesn't play, can we play a guy like Elijah Penny? Tyler, I'm looking for some cheap running backs, and it's weird. You think by week 16, this is kind of where you scrounge somebody off the waiver wire in your season-long league, and you bink it with some guy you never even heard of. But there's really nobody out there at this point.
No, it's a really, really tough week. I'm going to be spending up at running back, I think, almost across the board here. I could make a case for Duke Johnson. Good matchup here against the Browns where they'll be trailing and they have some suspect linebackers in pass coverage. Kind of like the idea of I'll draw on a blank here.
Joe Mixon's a guy that I've heard.
Joe Mixon, thank you. Exactly what I was talking about.
Look at that.
Not Geo. Don't say Geo. And all I kept saying was Geo. Okay, Rex Burkett. Or I'm sorry.
Joe Mixon.
Joe Mixon, coming off 2 weeks, I think now, off concussion. Should have fresh legs again, something that we were just prioritizing. Kind of like the matchup here where he'll be in negative game script. Saw a ton of work prior to his injury, which could make an interesting play. 5,100 on DK. But again, I'm not really eager to play any of these cheap running backs.
Yeah, Scott, doesn't sound like you like anybody either as far as some cheap running backs. Tell me somebody, who's your dud, who you're definitely not playing?
Value is just really hard to find. My dud this week, I'm going to go with Jamal Williams. So he dominated while Aaron Rodgers was last on IR. We saw just 10 touches last week with Rodgers back under center. Rodgers, we know, is not playing this week. Still, he played on 80% of the team snaps from weeks 11 through 14, and then that number fell to just 61% last week, due in part to Aaron Jones making his return. The matchup's also really tough to get excited about. Minnesota's allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs this season.
All right. Should say, if you guys are not PFF members, you're doing DFS wrong. All sorts of things on the site. The player grades, interactive matchups, rankings, articles. Tyler, you were saying before the show, you wanted to touch on, you were talking about the shadow coverage chart. Tell the people what that is.
Yeah, so it's a really great tool that I don't think a lot of people know about. ProFootballFocus.com/shadow-coverage-matrix just allows you a great oversight of which teams utilize shadow coverage and how they fared against those receivers. We can see right at the top If you're looking at it, Patrick Peterson for the Arizona Cardinals, just been shutting down cornerbacks all year. It allows you to see some other guys that you aren't exactly sure about. Like, okay, Morris Claiborne, he's a guy that's came out of nowhere this season to me, has performed quite well in shadow coverage as well. Has given us some touchdowns as of late, but I think there's just a lot of different ways that you can utilize this to your advantage. Mostly trying to find out which studs to fade. I think that's the biggest way to implement this into your research.
This guy's not a stud, but I missed your fade. You want to talk about Samaje Perine, and I believe I'm going to pull the note up now. I feel like he got dinged today in practice, but tell me why you don't want to play him anyway, even if he's healthy.
So the thing with Perine was his usage was a bit assumed heading into last week, and then that we kind of assumed that with all the injuries that the running backs have endured for Washington, that he'd be walking into 90% of the touches, and that really didn't happen. Capri Bibbs sapped that value away from Perine last week. He played on 35% of the snaps, seeing 36% of the running back touches. As the pass catching back, we saw that big screen play that went for a touchdown, and it just really made Perine more of a Jordan Howard-esque play where if he's not getting a touchdown, he's just not really going to do much for you. His lack of receiving upside just takes him off the board. Should be a really tough matchup here against the Broncos as well. They're number 2 in run DVOA, and they've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs this year.
Perine left practice today with the groin, so keep your eye on that. The groin injury. That's a funny sentence. But all right, let's talk about receivers. Scott, you kind of, instead of giving like a stud, you gave like 2 guys that are kind of sort of the mid-tier as far as value and as far as studs. Fire one of yours out, or fire them both out.
Yeah, so on FanDuel, I expect to have heavy exposure to Robert Woods and Jarvis Landry, who are both way too cheap, priced as mid-range or low-end wide receiver 2s. Robert Woods has scored at least 16 fantasy points and averaged 23.2 fantasy points per game over his last 4 games. He's clearly that team's wide receiver 1 when he is active, and the matchup couldn't be better considering Tennessee ranks worst in fantasy points per game over expectation to opposing wide receiver 1s. Jarvis Landry gets a Kansas City defense allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to slot wide receivers. Won't see a lot of Marcus Peters. He ranks 4th among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game. He's priced as a mid-range wide receiver 2 on FanDuel. He is a top 5 wide receiver in terms of volume. He's no longer just a cash game play. He has legitimate tournament upside, even on FanDuel. He leads all wide receivers in targets inside the 10-yard line. He ranks top 12 in expected touchdowns this season. So I like those guys quite a bit, though both are better plays on FanDuel than DraftKings.
Why did you dodge the stud conversation as far as like a guy like Michael Thomas, a guy like Keenan Allen? Did they just like not fit your build over there in FanDuel because they both feel like really good plays this week?
It's two things. One is just like really tough to find like a high-priced wide receivers to like. I think my top guy is DeAndre Hopkins. My number 2 guy is Adam Thielen. I like Keenan Allen, but like nothing about the matchup stands out over the last 5 weeks. No team has allowed fewer fantasy points to slot wide receivers than the Jets. Also, game script kind of works against him. Plus, I just love all these high-priced running backs. So it looks like on the far majority of my lineups, I'm paying up at running back and down at wide receiver.
That's interesting. I didn't realize Keenan Allen. I mean, you think a couple extra throws will come his way with Hunter Henry being out, or that's just not enough to sway you?
It could be. And honestly, Buster Screen should be no match for Keenan Allen. It's just an interesting trend I noticed in the data. Probably not something I'm buying too much into, but like I said, almost all of my lineups are high-priced running backs, cheaper wide receivers.
And Hopkins, like money's not a thing. Hopkins is your favorite receiver this week?
Yeah, I'm probably not even playing the Monday slate, though, so I'm not sure it matters.
Yeah, I'm scrolling down, and for some reason, I'm just drawing a blank. I'm like, who do they play on Monday? I forget what. Yeah, I don't think it's a good matchup off the top of my head, but like he's going to get like 15 balls thrown his way. He probably won't be efficient, but he's still like, I don't know, maybe the best receiver, or second best receiver.
Yeah, they play the Steelers, I think, and a lot's going to hinge on Joe Hayden's availability. But still, I mean, the guy just came off of a wide receiver 1 week against Jacksonville, which is fairly unheard of. The dude's matchup proof, game script proof. He's with Antonio Brown out, he's just, to me, clearly the top wide receiver play of the week, though that I think expert consensus has Keenan Allen number 1 this week.
Yeah, Tyler, chime in here. You're going to give your stud in a second, and like you didn't go all the way up either as far as the pay scale. But what are your thoughts? I mean, we ignored Julio Jones. I guess you could throw him into the conversation as well. Of course, Thomas is just the epitome of just he's super solid every single week. Plenty of targets, great floor. He's finally getting touchdowns now. He could have had 3 last week. He only ended up with 1 just because of wonky things. He actually, I believe it's 9 red zone targets in the last 3 games. How do we feel about the top tier wide receivers?
I agree with Scott, where I'm just going to be paying up for top running backs instead. But you could easily make a case for Michael Thomas. He played the Falcons just 2 weeks ago, and they're rematching here, garnering 14 targets. He finished with a 10, 117, and 1 stat line. That was good for over 30 DraftKings points. He's seen less than 8 targets just once this season. That was back in week 6. Should be locked in for volume again. This is the highest projected scoring game on the slate. Our opposing teams are passing on Atlanta at the 6th highest rate in the league at 60.3%. There's just a lot heading into his favor this week. But it's just price. It's just hard to justify it.
Yeah, so basically your thought process is, as of right now, you're just doubling down on elite running backs, and you only have so much funds to delegate out for receivers, so you're saving some salary there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a common line of thinking this week, so it could be a bit contrarian, just starting going 1, 2, 3 high-priced wide receivers and building from there. I think you could build a very contrarian lineup that way, just starting off with something simple like that.
Talk about your stud.
My stud this week is none other than Douglas Baldwin. Love this guy. Love the spot for him here. Orlando Scandrick for the Cowboys will likely be out another week. Just opens up a terrific matchup for Baldwin here against Xavier Woods. He's a 6th-round rookie. That's a converted safety. Good luck, Cowboys. I mean, I don't know how you're going to try to defend Doug Baldwin here with this. The Cowboys have allowed the 6th most receptions, the most receiving touchdowns. They're just allowing a ton of work to opposing wideouts this year. And Baldwin's price on both sites makes him a very strong cash and GPP play. I love him a lot on FanDuel. I think he's going to be locked into a high number of my lineups. He's been in a slump lately, but I think the matchup here in the slot where it should just be one where he and Russell Wilson exploit it time and time again.
It's one of your. It sounds like one of your correlation plays. You're going to run some Russ and Baldwin lineups this week.
Yeah, bring it back with maybe some Zeke or something.
I love that.
Both those teams are fighting for a playoff spot. They're both 8-6. Like, it's going to be a hard-fought game.
You think we're the only 2 people that are thinking, let's start our teams with those 3 guys? Nobody else has that idea, right? I'm sure.
No, original. Yep.
Is it possible? Like, I meant to do this before the show, and I meant to check this out as far as like they're the late game, and I wonder like if Seattle and Dallas, if whoever loses is automatically out, but whoever wins still is like has to needs a lot of help. They might know before the game, possibly. I'm not really sure if they're officially eliminated. Do you guys know on this?
I just know the Lions are also 8-6, and I think they're the 1:00 game. Easy matchup for them against the Bengals, so they should win. I think both teams will prepare with that in mind, that they'll have to win.
They need Atlanta to lose too. I know that. So at some point, if not this week, some points, and they're probably we'll see. They most likely it's the NFL, anything can happen, but most likely we think New Orleans is going to lose. All right, so give me your value play because I'm landing on this guy too, and it's not comfortable because I'm getting flashbacks to week 1, and I'm still not over it, man. But you tell me about your cheapie this week, your value play as far as receivers.
All right, the cheap guy I'm going with this week is Kendall Wright, just $3,800 on DraftKings this week, but he's been playing lights out lately. He has 24 targets over his last 2 outings, putting up fantasy totals of 23.7 and 15.1 points. Great matchup here in the slot against the Browns. They rank dead last in fantasy points per target and 9th worst in fantasy points per game to opposing slot receivers. That's per Scott Barrett's actual opportunity report. Been using that a lot lately, so just want to give him a shout out there.
He's right here.
There he is. I just love his price point. Like, I mean, it allows for a ton of flexibility. If we want to pay up for these stud running backs, like I want to hammer in 2 running backs and probably a 3rd in the flex. I'm going to need to find a way to make that happen. Kendall Wright allows that to happen.
Scott, is this one of those deals where he beat you like to the Google spreadsheet? Like this is your guy as well, and you had to like settle on a second person?
Right. Yeah. He's my top value play of the week.
So did you play him in week 1? Just out of curiosity, you remember week 1? It was a tight cap, and he was super popular. And I think he didn't do anything until like maybe late in the 4th quarter when an injury happened. If I'm getting my memory recalls.
Yeah, I don't think I went all in, but I definitely had a lot of Kendall Wright, and I have some of the same concerns that you have right now. Another guy I want to mention is Roger Lewis. He actually has seen better volume than Kendall Wright in recent weeks. 29.8 expected fantasy points over the past 2 weeks, 5th most among wide receivers. But he's going to run 50% of his routes to get Patrick Robinson, so that kind of takes him out of contention for me. Also, Kenny Galladay is a guy drawing some buzz with TJ Jones out, though I like Kendall Wright significantly more than both.
Let's talk about this. First of all, does PFF think that Blake Bortles is good now? Is this a mirage? Was he never as terrible as we thought he was? What's the deal with Bortles? Obviously, that defense helps him. Obviously, the running game helps him. Is he an okay quarterback? Where does he at?
He's still, to me, probably one of the 5 worst quarterbacks in the league. He does get a lot of help from a strong running game, from an excellent defense, and really bad quarterbacks can have a really good 3-week stretch. But you look, week 12, he had 160 passing yards, no passing touchdowns, 1 interception, 154 yards, 1 touchdown the week before that. I think he is who we think he is, but that doesn't mean he's not still a strong DFS play this week.
Don't let him off the hook.
Yeah, he's not someone I'll be looking into. I think it's more of a Leonard Fournette game, but wouldn't get mad at anyone if he played him. And I do like going back to the well on D.D. Westbrook this week. I think he'll draw a low ownership.
Let's have that conversation because we talk about ownership. You mentioned ownership and recency bias and all that. And people loved Westbrook last week. I played him a ton on FanDuel, not that much on DK, but a lot of people loved him everywhere. And He just, the output wasn't there. And Cole went absolutely nuts. Jaden Mickens just got out of his car and went nuts. He with a couple of touchdowns as well too. And the injury to Lee's out. Hearns presumably is not going to play either. So how do we size this up? If you're going to, I personally, I want to throw on San Fran before I run on San Fran. I know you mentioned it's a Fournette game, but I prefer the passing game here. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm willing to forgive. I'm willing to go back to Westbrook this week.
So what you're saying, for sure. I mean, it's an exploitable matchup in either case. Just the Jaguars are the most run-heavy team in the NFL, so they're probably going to go run-heavy against the team that ranks worst in fantasy points per game over expectation to opposing running backs and have been for 3 consecutive seasons. But like you said, the matchup's good through the air as well. San Francisco's giving up the 9th most fantasy points per game, the 3rd most fantasy points per target to outside wide receivers. That's where Westbrook runs like 85% of his routes. Like you said, Lee is out of the lineup. His volume last week made no sense, and I'm just chalking it up to variance because I don't want to play Jaden Mickens. I don't want to play Keelan Cole. But before that, he was seeing like a mid-range wide receiver 2 workload, 13.6 expected fantasy points per game. This is a guy who won the Balishnikov Award last year. He runs a ridiculous 40-yard dash time at his pro day. I like him quite a bit. Again, though, the concern is game script and whether or not they'll need to pass.
Tyler, what's your take there as far as the Jags receivers?
Just love D.D. Westbrook. Scott summed it up perfectly there, but prior to last week, he was averaging 8.3 targets. He was out producing Marquise Lee in almost every statistical category. He has been by default their number 1 wide receiver. If Allen Hearns' ankle keeps him out again, he should be that number 1 wide receiver again. Just love this matchup here, especially against the particular cornerback he should run the majority of his routes against. That's Dante Johnson. He's our 3rd worst graded cornerback this year. He's allowing a 116.9 passer rating. That's the 2nd highest in the league. I'm just hoping a lot of people get burned by Dede. He was over 27% owned in the Millie Maker last week. I hope a lot of people are just really burned by him and don't go back to him this week because he's a great play if they throw.
I was burned by several receivers last week. Not as much. I mean, Dede for sure in some places, but like Josh Gordon. Can we play Josh Gordon this week? I mean, against the Bears. Any takers on Josh Gordon? Like, you could certainly play him. What's our level of interest here, Tyler?
Scott has some great numbers on him, but the Bears have been completely exploitable against the right side where Josh Gordon runs the plurality of his routes. I just love the game script here where they should be 7-point dogs in this one. They're going to have to throw. I think it's a good bounce back week for Gordon where nobody's talking about him.
Yeah, I think he's going to be low. Well, the lowest owned he's been probably the entire season. Give me those stats there, Scott.
So last week he ran 68% of his routes from Deshaun Kaiser's right. He's their right wide receiver. Chicago's allowing the most fantasy points per game to right wide receivers this season. Also the highest percentage of. Fuller's a lot more beatable than Prince of Mukamara, so that makes sense. He's also averaging 15.7 expected fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks. That would rank 8th most among all wide receivers over a full season.
One more guy I'm willing to forgive. I think I'm willing to forgive. And Bird is the word. He just kind of took over there in Carolina. But Funchess, it's one of the more tilting plays where he didn't catch a touchdown that was right in his hands, and he got hurt at the same time. He did come back later in the game, but he was another guy that just absolutely flat out tanked for me, Scott. Can you give me some encouraging words? Because Tampa, walking wounded there, you could definitely pass on him. We didn't mention Cam during quarterback, so certainly I think he's in play as well. If not for the arm, the legs as well, the combination platter. And we'll talk about tight ends in a second too. But Olsen certainly was resurrected last week as well. Tell me I can play Funchess.
You can play Funchess. I'm still tilting over Bird, who smashed on 3 targets, catching like 2 5-yard touchdowns. All week I talked about him being a terrible play. 3 targets. Still feel good about the process there. But yeah, Funchess disappointed for sure last week. 1 catch for 19 yards. But prior to last week, he saw 6 targets in 12 consecutive weeks. The matchup's good as well. He runs 68% of his routes from the left. Tampa Bay is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to left wide receivers. Yes, Olsen's back. Yes, Olsen is also in a good matchup, is going to steal some work. But no, I still have Funchess as a high-end wide receiver too this week in a dream matchup.
I'm going to fess up to what a donkey I am. Well, you think it was a bad play from the start, but I was considering, just because last week the cap was really, really tight, and I was considering playing Bird in a lot, and not a lot of spots, but plenty of spots. But then I saw, Ted Ginn's out. Willie Snead is minimum salary. Swap out Bird, because Bird's like 5'6", what is he, 5'9", like 170 pounds or so. I'm like, this guy's not going to catch touchdowns, and he got 2 last week, and he got his butt cheek in, and it was reviewed. He was all good to go, but. All right. Oh, one more I have because I've heard plenty of people talk about this dude, and never once. It's been a long time, at least a year now, where somebody said, "Hey, I'm so bummed I didn't play this guy because he killed me not playing him or swapping him out." But the name brand is there, the matchup is fine, the targets should be aplenty. Tyler, talk about Mike Evans. Is he playable?
So he had a really big bounce back game last week. Think he is playable this week, in a week where he's not priced up with the rest of the studs. You kind of just overlook him, to be honest. I do like this matchup here for him. Should have a pretty high ceiling. I don't know. We saw last week Jameis Winston got things turned around. This offense is a little bit moving more in the positive direction. I understand getting some shares for him this week, but again, he's not one of my top. There's a lot of guys to play in that price range, and he doesn't outrank some of them for me.
There's a lot of that running game is in shambles as of right now. Who knows what's going on? Probably Martin's not going to ever run again for them. We talked with the tight end, of course, is dinged. They lost. I'm forgetting the name for some reason. What's the tight end? It's not there, but
OJ Howard.
Yeah, Howard's out. We'll talk about Brayton in a second when we talk about tight ends. Deshaun Jackson probably not going to play as well. So it's a weird thing. Djax can stretch the field, so maybe it hurts a guy like Evans. Maybe the defense, focuses more on Evans, but maybe he also gets more targets. So not all targets are created equal, and his targets might be poor. He's going to have bad efficiency, but if he's getting 15 balls thrown his way, I guess he's worth a look. We've yet to talk about our duds. And Scott, feel free to chime in on any of those guys we talked about there that you didn't get a chance to speak on, but give me your dud wide receiver.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Mike Evans that Carolina's given up the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers since week 8. He's going to be shadowed by James Bradbury, who's allowed the 3rd most yards of any cornerback this season. He's another guy I like. Good call there. My dud, this one's fairly simple. It's Robbie Anderson. He's been targeted so Bryce Petty has targeted Anderson on 29% of his career pass attempts. That's a really impressive number, but one, those targets are coming from Bryce Petty, so you need to discount them. And 2, you need to discount them again because he's going to be running the majority of his routes against our number 1 rated cornerback this season, Casey Hayward. Since week 6, opposing quarterbacks are averaging a passer rating of just 26.4 when targeting him. That's well below if the quarterback had just spiked the ball into the dirt. He ranks 17th in routes and coverage over this stretch, but 97th in receptions allowed. That's in spite shadowing Amari Cooper, Demaryius Thomas, Des Bryant, Josh Gordon, Josh Doxson. Want no part of Anderson this week.
Tyler, you're done.
Yeah, speaking of shadow coverage, the guy I want to fade is Darius Slay. He draws some very tough outings against number 1 wide receivers, and AJ Green's offense has just been pretty lifeless after last week's debacle. Here's how Darius Slay has done against some opposing stud wideouts this year. Against Odell Beckham, 3 targets. He went 3-30-0. Julio, 8 targets, 4-50-0. Michael Thomas, 2 targets, 1-4-0. Antonio Brown, 4 targets, 1-9-0. Darius Slay has just eliminated top wideouts. And we're at the point in the year where we're seeing some teams give up. Marvin Lewis gave up on the team last week, and we saw them fall extremely flat to the Vikings. They just scored at will. And I'm expecting the Lions to hammer the Bengals here this week. I don't think AJ Green does a lot. He saw just 4 targets last week. I'm expecting a similar disappointing outing here.
Yeah, the Bengals just want to hit the simulate season button, right? They're done, and Marvin Lewis is done, and, lame duck coach. I don't really want any part of it. I agree with you. But let's talk about tight ends. And for me, as far as tight end, my approach is, penthouse or outhouse. You spend all the way up or you spend all the way down. And so, Scott, you're arguing. Scott, you got Gronk. Tyler, you got Kelsey. Both amazing options. Give me the Gronk pitch. I know just in our spreadsheets it just says he's Gronk, and I can't argue with that. You can also say he smashes.
So you guys want us on here because you want the dank PFF stats, but you don't really need it for Gronk. It's just he's Gronk. I actually like Travis Kelce a little bit more, so this is kind of a case where Tyler beat me to the punch. But I mean, it's Gronk. He's the greatest tight end, greatest fantasy tight end of all time in terms of anything on a per game, per target, per snap, per route, per whatever basis. He's just a man, and this is definitely a beatable matchup for him. Like I said, I do like Kelsey a little bit more, but really there's only 4 tight ends in play for me on the main slate. It's Tyler's stud and value, and it's my stud and value.
Well, Tyler, sell us on Kelsey, not like we need to be.
No. I mean, he's just a complete lock this week, playing against Miami, who's a team we've routinely targeted with opposing tight ends this season. Over the past few weeks, we've seen Gronk go for 5-82-2. Charles Clay went for 5-68-0, and OJ Howard went for 3-52-1, all having great success against the Dolphins. Over his last 7 games, Kelsey's averaging 9.3 targets per game. He scored 20-plus fantasy points in 4 of those 7, and that's the ceiling that we're chasing here when we pay up for Kelsey. The Dolphins have allowed a league-leading 70.7% of red zone trips against them to successfully finish with a touchdown. That's huge for a player who ranks 7th among all players in red zone targets. The Chiefs are implied for the 5th highest total on the main slate. He basically checks all of the boxes of what we're looking for when we're looking for a tight end. And I think my biggest decision this week will be determining if I like him or Kareem Hunt more and how to roster them both accordingly.
Yeah, there's negative correlation between those two, so you probably want to grab one of them. One's going to have a big game, the other one maybe not so much. So as far as the cheapies, 2 guys that step up because of injury. Scott, you got Cam Brate. Tyler, you have an old man Antonio Gates. Scott, you fire as far as Brate first.
Yes, there's really nothing that stands out in terms of the matchup, in terms of recent usage. He's also battling hip and knee injuries. That being said, he's probably my top tight end of the slate. He ranked 4th among tight ends in fantasy points over the first 8 weeks of the season. And he started, surrendering snaps to Howard, also blocking a little bit more. But he's just far too cheap given what kind of workload we should expect with OJ Howard out.
Tyler, Antonio Gates.
Yeah, he's priced the absolute minimum on both sites. Really opens up a lot in terms of roster construction. The Jets are tied for top 10 most red zone trips allowed to opposing offenses. Gives them a great opportunity for the Chargers to score. And they're tied for the 3rd most touchdowns given up to opposing tight ends. A 10-yard touchdown like he had last week more than pays off cash game value for him.
So the hyphens. We don't like the hyphens at tight end this week. Who don't you like, Scott?
That's ASJ. So it's just the toughest matchup possible. Chargers lead all defenses in fantasy points per game allowed over expectation. Gronk, Ertz, Kelsey combined for just 13.5 fantasy points per game. Only one other tight end scored over 12. He's hit 50 yards just once this season, hasn't scored since week 7. Not interested.
Quickly, Tyler.
RSJ is my guy. He played on 38% of the snaps, finishing with a 2-11-0 stat line without Jermaine Gresham. I'm fading again.
We're going to step aside. We're going to get out of here. Thanks for watching the Pro Football Focus show here on RotoGrinders. For those that want defense, Chicago, Washington, and the Chargers. That's it. He's Scott. He's Tyler. I'm Dean. Thanks for watching. We're out of here. Holla!